Say the word. I'm left behind, obey the light.
All right. All right, guys. We're gonna have Boy and Fusli starting up momentarily. I am waiting for the round to start, and for the game to start. Um, like I said earlier, to count anything in chess as decided before it starts is kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, Boy has been training, and I think he has past history as a chess player, and there's just certain things about chess that if you have more experience, there's just no expectation to it's like if I went up against Magnus Carlsen right now, or Hikaru Nakamura, or anybody like that. It'd be extremely unlikely that I would be able to win. Although we still need to think like very objectively just about the position. The players do matter. Um, the players do matter in how the game will turn out. But at the same time, we're trying to analyze the position, not the players. Okay, like that's usually what we.
Fair enough. And who do you think the most entertaining participants have been so far? I know there's.
Who do you think the most entertaining participants have been so far? I would say Slicker. Slicker has been. I mean, he's been over the top. His behavior is a little bit kind of like on the edge and maybe a little bit too far. Feel like he's really getting into like the trash talk. Slicker has definitely been uh, entertaining. And Nim as well. But I think Nim went a little bit too far. But he realized himself. He was like, "Oh wait, I can't do this. This is a big event. Like, can't be doing this. Stuff." So he's kind of catching himself on that. Realizing that we still have to have some decorum here. Just because you're playing against players that maybe you interact with differently in different environments, but this is kind of supposed to be like a professional environment. Um, Looks like the game has not started just yet. It should follow as soon as it is, but I'm just double checking by watching the stream to make sure that I'm not missing the game. But I did put on /follow on Fusli so that we could see the game when it starts. Yeah, okay, here we go, and it started. All right, so Leslie, we don't know too much about her opening preparation, or at least I don't. We don't know how she'll respond to various different openings, so I'm almost thinking because like I think she's most used to the queen's pawn opening, so obviously if he really wants to go for tactical advantage, you might want to, yeah, he goes for the e4 pawn opening. And so she plays c6, so she must already know that if c6, maybe she has like an opening preparation where she plays the same moves every time for black, and so maybe she knows just to play c6 no matter what happens. So it looked like a pre-move. But I don't know. It's e4 is very tactical opening. Carol Khan is there's a lot of theory in Carol Khan, but a lot of the ideas are similar. Like basically you're going for controlling d5 and not really not really super exciting right now, but now the e file is completely open. In the Carol Khan generally I think Boy made slightly mistake here. Okay, no, he's playing very sharp. Going for direct movement here. Getting the knight in here is definitely important. I feel like this definitely this I feel like I've seen this line before, but this is not the Carol Khan I'm used to. I'm used to the knight coming out first, and usually. Yeah, usually something happens where the knight's going to be on d4. or rather you play knight c3. Usually this is where the trades happen. Is you allow black to take on e4, but this is definitely a line that comes out from the Caro-Kann as well. I'm just not used to seeing it as much. It looks more like different opening. I'm trying to put my finger on what opening this reminds me of. This is the exchange variation of Caro-Kann with c takes d5. It's, it's definitely not what I'm used to seeing the Caro-Kann, but she's playing very carefully. There's definitely a pin here on the knight, but Voyboy just making sure to castle, making sure to keep all of his pieces in the game. Everything's protected. There's still some things to do in the opening. Get your bishop activated, maybe even bishop d6, a little bit passive, but definitely safe to play. Bishop b4 might be happening. Okay, so now she has to play g6 and bishop g7 in order to get that bishop activated. Not a bad idea, considering that like you may want to be putting some pressure on the d4 pawn. Definite ideas there. h3 can come at any moment, but then bishop takes f3 and queen takes f3. If h3, you could also play bishop h5. G4 could happen, and then bishop g6, but which would not be good. So then if you're planning on playing, okay, so if you're planning on playing bishop h5, you will be unable to play g6, and so that means that you'll need to find a place for your knight to go. So maybe knight f5, bishop e7, and then maybe knight d6, and then you're maneuvering your knights over to the queen side. Different ideas for black here. Oh, and she's going for just she's going for covering on c2 right away. I would have recommended h5 because then you have your bishop over here. It's a little bit safer than on f5, but not too big of a difference. G4 can come at any moment, of course, and then still bishop g6. Ideas might be queen c2 and then push e5 at some point. But in order for that to happen, you need to move your knight over to the queen side and play bishop d6 in order to cover e5 enough in order to push that e5 pawn. So there's certainly ideas for black here. Voyboy playing very kind of like out in the open. I actually kind of surprised. I think he might be feeling a little bit overconfident. He might say like, oh well, I've studied chess. My opponent, that can happen. When you are technically stronger than your opponent, there's psychological factors involved as well in chess. And Leslie, she's going to be completely focused on her game. She's going to be completely focused on trying to do her best because she's playing a higher rated opponent. Now, but when you're playing a lower rated opponent and somebody who is like, when you're tactically better than your opponent, you might be playing a little bit too cocky. You might be going in and saying, hey, like my opponent's going to lose. I got this in the bag. And then you're just going to play a little bit too aggressively and you underestimate your opponent because in chess, if you play the right moves, it doesn't matter how good you are because you played the right moves because, and you won't be able to come back from it at a certain point as long as she plays, strong fundamentals, as long as she, makes sure that she doesn't give away any pieces. So far, no blunders. There is a strong attack on this knight here, but the knight is defended twice. Maybe even queen c7 can happen to defend the knight again. But also queen c7 has a twofold idea of also maintaining control over e5 and all the rest of the b8 h2 diagonal. So there's definitely ideas of queen c7 getting the queen into an active spot in the game. And then after you play queen c7, maybe you're thinking of playing a6 to attack the bishop. G6 happened. So now that she has the bishop on e4, I guess I missed that in all the confusion. F3 can happen, and once F3 happens, you play bishop F5, and then she's going to lose the light squared bishop. So that's actually not that great now. But I mean, she does have counterplay. So if you do attack, you can counter the other bishop. And at that point, you can always So she can. If you play F3 next move, if I were playing black pieces right now, well, okay, no. It's white to move here. So if F3 happens, if I were playing white, I would play knight D2 first, just to make sure that after you play F3, there's no counterplay. Because if F3 happens, your only move is just to trade off bishop for knight. Because if you go back to F5, G5 can happen, and you're just completely losing the bishop. So f3, looking like Voivoy is going to play f3, but she does have the way to kind of save material here, save face rather, save face and save material by playing bishop takes knight, because okay, so Voivoy going for a different idea here, pinning this knight. So now this knight's going to have trouble repositioning over to the queen side, because like I said earlier, maybe ideas like knight c8 and knight b6, covering over to the queen side, trying to maybe even thinking about playing knight to c4 and then playing a6 to trap that bishop into kind of like not so useful squares. This isn't too big of a deal. I mean, you could just play h6, but then bishop h4 doesn't really accomplish much. So then you just do bishop g7, just putting pressure on that knight. Maybe you're going to trade off that knight, so knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and then bishop takes knight, and then you have some center control as black here. So not completely lost yet. Fuseli really proving her understanding of opening principles. Really just like not rushing in for an attack. She's not trying any crazy like queen h5 moves like she did against Erob. I think she understands that she's done a lot of work on chess, but maybe Voivoy has as well. But a lot of these players, I think they're easy. It's really easy to underestimate somebody who's low rated. It's also easy to underestimate somebody who recently started the game. But we also have to give people credit in their ability to learn. And while there are certain things like with tactics that somebody who's more experienced are just going to see more and more and more than your opponent. But if you don't allow these tactics, if you play positionally and you don't allow like any tactical abilities, then that doesn't really play too much of an idea. So Caro-Kann, very positional opening, very good idea to play Caro-Kann when you know your opponent's better at tactics. Because if she had played like maybe Sicilian would have worked too, but if she had played e5, I feel like Voivoy would have taken this game. So I feel like she understands. She understands the idea, and obviously the coaching helps, but if she's taking the information seriously, she's taking the coaching seriously. All these players have been proving themselves to have been taking things seriously. There's certain things like I'm a little bit disappointed in Erob, but I almost feel like I almost feel like he's losing all of his games on purpose, just not on purpose, but I feel like he's losing all of his games for his fans' sake, just so his fans control him. Because I feel like his fan base, he was even saying his fans just like to make fun of him, and so I feel like he's almost, I don't think he's losing on purpose, but I feel like he's not taking the games as seriously as he should. I don't know, maybe I don't want to put words into his mouth. I feel like sometimes you don't want to you need to give these players credit, because not everybody is able to make the same amount of progress in a short amount of time. And he might come back later, like, months down the line and just stomp everyone. We don't know that. This is only the first big tournament between all these streamers. Twitch Rivals is coming up. And some of these players, Erob might actually end up taking like a lot more victories if he's playing in Twitch Rivals. I'm not sure who's playing in Twitch Rivals. But what I'm saying is, like, don't discredit players just because they're, because of one performance. You gotta think about, in chess, we want to think about how people perform over time. And if somebody does really well one tournament, but then 10 tournaments after that they perform really, really poorly, then you would say that person is really not making a great performance, even though they made like one great performance. If somebody's making okay performance and making steady incremental growth, then you can say that player is making extraordinary progress. So far we've been seeing just nothing but fundamentals and just safe play from both sides. Maybe Voivoy kind of might be overextending just a little bit, but he seems like he's solid. I would say, I don't know. There is some trouble with this light squared bishop, and now I'm afraid, because she did not take that knight when she had the chance, and so now I'm afraid that, okay, and this is exactly what I'm afraid of. This is the biggest chance that that Voivoy has in taking this game so far. I've noticed is attacking this bishop, because what are you going to do? If you retreat, g5 can happen. I mean, what are you going to do? You can counterattack the bishop, but the bishop can just move back. And then now you can't even, take, you wouldn't want to take that pawn anyway, because the rook and the knight are both guarding it. So, really, I mean, not much to do here as black here. I don't know if she saw that coming. Earlier on, she needed to take that knight, and it would have helped that rook develop, but at the same time, it would have saved the bishop and kept the material equal. But now you have to play bishop f5, and then after g4, the best thing you can hope for is just do a desperado, bishop takes g4, and then f takes g4, opening up the rook, and it's just, okay. I'm not, okay, she's attacking the bishop instead. I mean, you got to give her some credit for that, trying to create some counterplay, but sadly it just doesn't work. All you have to do is play bishop e2. So, like I said, most of these games you will see like some really exciting stuff in the opening, and then as soon as okay, well, Voyboy just completely ignoring that, just trading off pieces because he knows he's going to be winning some material here. But if she takes the bishop, the knight can't take the pawn back. Because if the knight takes the pawn, then you can play bishop d3, and then she saves her bishop. So, obviously, b takes c6, definitely a good idea to do, taking the bishop. But the knight can't take the pawn. So, but there are bigger fish to fry here. So after pawn takes bishop, and then d takes e4, pawn takes pawn, but then knight takes pawn. So Voyboy's going to be up material here, and he's definitely going to be able to win the game. Obviously, you can't discount. You can't. You can't you can't take blunders out of the equation, especially people are saying that Voyboy's more around 1700 rated, so it's highly unlikely he's going to blunder any pieces straight up, but there are always chances. So I really hope that Leslie stays in the game and just plays it out to the end. And if Voyboy truly is as strong as people say he is, he would be able to end the game swiftly and let us all get back to the tournament. No, I mean this is kind of just showing us the difference between experienced players and beginner players. Is that maybe you can have, and what we're noticing nowadays, especially since all the resources online, is that people are actually playing really good in the opening nowadays. You'll see beginners, and this is definitely proof. We'll see absolute beginners like playing very good fundamentals in the opening. But then this just proves to us that understanding the opening lines doesn't equate to winning chess, because if you can't see middle game tactics, if you can't create a winning position from the end of the from the opening, then it doesn't really matter. And so but I mean, it just kind of goes to show that just because you're a beginner doesn't mean you can't understand the openings, and you can at least play some opening principles that anybody can learn. This is kind of this is great. This is great, this is a great experiment for chess. This is a really exciting time for chess, because it's showing people straight up that if you're a beginner, you can learn the opening principles, you can learn something, and you can start improving. And we've already known this as chess players. We already know that anybody can learn chess. The number one reason why people don't play chess is because they say, "Oh, I don't know how to play chess. I can't play chess." It's like everybody can play chess. It's just not everybody's going to be good right away, obviously. I mean, just like anything, you learn how to drive. You're not going to be good at driving at first. You're going to be really nervous. You're going to be having issues. It's just like there's a ton of things to learn, and there's a ton of things that you need to practice. And so now Voyboy up an entire piece. What we're probably going to see is maybe we're going to see moves like knight d7, but we don't. That would be a little bit premature, because the rook can just come in and attack the knight, and then maybe come over to knight c5 to attack the queen. But the knight would be positioned on whether or not you want. It looks like this would be a bad idea for white, because the focus needs to be on the king side because most of the pieces in the game, the rook and the knight, and potentially the other knight coming over to knight df3. So knight df3 would probably happen after rook f4. Maybe you would even double up the rooks, and maybe even make a battery with the queen and the rooks, and then attack on f7. So the biggest attack white has, I would say, would be queen f4. But then you can play f5. The thing about that, though, is then you can play queen h6, and that covers some escape squares, and you could start getting your knight into the game. or maybe even just try to trade off like a knight for that pawn. That would be kind of cutting it close, giving the piece back for mating chances. You want to be really sure that you're going to deliver mate if you're going to give the piece back after you're already up a piece. So hopefully Voy Boy takes a page from Nate Hill's book and just plays very carefully, very professionally, just gets all of his pieces out, gets the rooks connected, makes sure there's no counterplay. And okay, so he's going straight up for getting rid of. Okay, so maybe he was looking ahead, if because he was thinking about making doubling up the rooks or maybe even making a battery with the queen involved and trying to checkmate on f7. But he can't do that. And also, this is attacking the bishop as well. So the bishop has to move, and maybe you're going to play bishop d6. But at this point, you can double up the rooks, and then maybe you can even move the rook somewhere and then get the queen involved and then threaten queen f7 check. The king goes to h8. Then you play knight g, and you'd have to somehow play knight. If you get like a rook over to h4 and then play knight g6 check, the pawn would be pinned, and if the queen is on f7, then that would be checkmate. So that's the ideas for this game, is that for white. If Voy Boy wants to take the game, okay, so she's going to create some counterplay. That does not save the bishop though. So sadly, she's going to lose the bishop, and now she's down even more material. So this is what we've noticed with the players, is that after they lose one piece, it kind of gets worse and worse and worse. Like you give up one piece, and then you give up another piece, and suddenly you just drop a queen for no reason. Rook f8 can happen. But that's not really going to be useful. You could just trade off, and then even then you could just further offer trades, and then just whittle down into a winning endgame. I really like this concept that Nate Hill was proving to us, is that you don't really necessarily want to go in for attacks if you don't have any opportunities. Now, you could play queen h4 and then play rook g6 check, because that. Oh no, you can't do that yet. Let's see. Definitely bring the rook into the game. Doubling up rooks, definitely not a bad move. Maybe just giving up the knight. If you just take the pawn, if pawn takes, then you do queen takes g6 check, and you have to play queen h8, queen h6 check, queen g8. It's gonna end up, yeah. Or you can do that. Just go straight for the attack. Okay, that will work too, because you're going to be threatening queen f7 check, and then you have to and then knight g6 checkmate. Okay, so if you take the rook, so h takes g6, queen takes g6 check. If queen f8, if king f8, queen f7 check, mate. So if king h8, then knight f7 checkmate. So there's mate in 2 coming, or yeah, mate in 2. So h takes g6. Well, if you play king h8, then it's just knight f7 checkmate. If you play king f8, okay, so now it's mate in 2. So queen takes g6. If king h8, knight f7 mate. If king f8, queen f7 mate. So sad loss for Leslie. Very good fundamentals in the opening. I would have to say she had very good fundamentals in the opening. She did not allow any imbalances, except for this light squared bishop is the only thing I would say that she allowed any kind of issues with. But like I said, like, as soon as she moved the bishop over to e4, moving the bishop over to e4, maybe she was thinking of trading off the knight, but the queen would come over. And then as soon as the knight goes away, so if you're gonna think about doing that, you should have just traded off the bishop right away. Let's go to the analysis board here. Let's make sure we don't get another game. So if we look at the analysis board here, if you're going to think about just, the thing about bringing the bishop out here is if you bring the bishop over to the king side and then you give up all your, and you know, you're outside of the pawn chain, that's fine. Usually you want to come over to bishop h5 or something. And then if you come over here, you just go over here and you're covering all these squares. But if you go this way, you should just give up that bishop entirely. Like that should just be right away. Get rid of that bishop. Maybe you're going to play g6, bishop g7, and then castle kingside. But yeah, I would say as soon as you bring that bishop out, let's just look at the evaluation. It is slightly, you know, it is slightly better for white, but I would not say that's game winning. So, but as soon as you move here, let's look at the evaluation. It's still even. But this was the game losing mistake, as I suspected. When you play bishop e4, it's like you're wasting so much tempo because you can. I mean, he started all those trades, but as soon as you save the knight, that gets rid of all your chances. But even if you just traded off the bishop, you should have just traded off the bishop right away. What's the evaluation here? This is definitely better for white, but not as good as it was with just playing bishop e4. So we do see ideas like that, but sadly, she loses the bishop, and that's just downhill from there. And Voyboy going straight for the win, playing very professionally as well because he was playing super accurately there. Sadly, sadly Leslie gave up the bishop on f6, and there's just no chances at that point. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that game. We will be back, or I will be back rather. I'll be back in another 35 minutes to cover the final game of the day at 3 p.m. 3 p.m. Pacific time. The final game of the day is going to be between. The final game of the day is going to be between Hutch and Yasuo. So look for, that's actually going to be a pretty even pair up, I believe. I do believe that will be a pretty even pair up. I could be wrong, but I feel like these players understand a lot of the they're kind of on the similar level. I believe I could be completely wrong, but at the same time, it should be an exciting game. So let's just try to find the moment that everything went south. Was here when you if you look at the evaluation here, it's pretty even. And so this was the critical moment in the game. Black to move here, and where to move that bishop. All right, so I will be back at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Alright guys, we're back. Looks like Yasuo was playing a few games, warming up. We will start his game as soon as it starts, of course. I have him on /follow. Let's look at his game he just played. I don't know what, I think he just ended it because he saw he was down material, but also because he wanted to. Obviously, his game's about to start, so I think he just didn't want to, like, since he saw he was down material, did not want to. Well, first of all, E3, a very strange opening. Maybe he was just trying things out, which is always good. I mean, you always want to try new openings out. You want to try different ideas. Sadly, though, this trade here does not work because you only have one piece defending the bishop, but you have two. I mean, one piece, it's defended once, but your opponent's attacking it twice. So sadly, that wouldn't have worked unless you had played e4. But even then, like, maybe just play d4 here. And you can't take because of the same reason. Well, first of all, if you take here, just take with the queen. Obviously, you do not want to take with the knight because bishop just takes the queen. But you're not really necessarily attacking the bishop here, but you're also attacking the knight here. So things to expect for this game based on this game alone. He likes to experiment. Yasuo really likes to experiment with different styles of openings. So that's actually a good trait to have. Is he will improve rapidly if you only play the same opening over and over and over again. You never change it up at all. Like, it's one thing, like what I do is I play the same first move for a very long time. I collect enough data from that. Obviously, there's different kinds of openings within those first moves as white. But I switch between any one of these openings. These are the 4 first moves for white. There's some other random first moves you can do, like maybe you can make G3 or H3. I mean B3. So right, we have Yasuo versus Hutch. Not sure what to expect here. So we got a Queen's Pawn opening yet again. We are seeing a lot of Queen's Pawn openings here this tournament, and I think it's because of the idea of well, first of all, it looks like we're not quite getting a London just yet. It looks like we're actually getting some theory here. We're getting okay. So now it's kind of clear that that everyone really likes this idea of the hat, of the hat, of having the pawns connected like this. They call it the hat. Everybody really likes that idea for white and black, but it looks like a lot of people playing the Queen's Pawn opening because it's pretty simple. It takes a lot of theory out of the equation. You pretty much play the same moves every single time. So the idea here is if you take the bishop, you take with the queen. Oof. So usually you want to just play bishop g3 in that situation. Although in that case you could just play f4, but then you can play bishop h4, and you have some influence over this diagonal. So this isn't terrible. This isn't really bad. Black gets his queen developed. So Yasuo getting his queen developed earlier because he started that trade. He is losing some tempo. So maybe the fact that the C pawn was there, able to push this queen, might be a deciding factor in tempo. Because now you have to move your queen somewhere. Maybe queen c7. Always trying to look for things I'm missing. Like, obviously, if there's an obvious blunder, sometimes it's not obvious to me because I don't see it. So if you play queen e7, looks like you're going for the king side. So maybe you're going to play knight f6. And then even though there is an f-pawn exposing the king, I would almost think that you'd want to castle king side just to get this rook activated and really make this pawn on the f-file powerful. If you castle king side, your king is slightly exposed, but you have to ask yourself, like, how is white going to attack this diagonal? This diagonal is completely protected by a pawn, so the bishop cannot come into it. So you really have to ask yourself, is it really dangerous that the king is exposed? Okay, so moving the knight twice, there's still 2 pieces that need to develop. Meanwhile, Hutch is ready to castle. There's no real threats that black can give with that knight just yet. I feel like moving a piece twice in the opening, generally not a great idea. Plus, Hutch can always just trade off, but there is the issue of you do not want to start this trade because the pawn will come in and then you're doing a fork on these pieces, which we've seen earlier today. So if you just keep your cool here, you just settle on, well, if you do take the knight, you can just capture with b takes c3, and now you have pawns in the center. You do also have a semi-open b file at that point, so you can just keep your cool and just give yourself a castle, protect your king. Do not start trades on this knight. That's as long as you don't do that. So now slightly different. Now you have this, but at the same time, if you do start this trade, which it's looking like he wants to start that trade, or either that or he wants to start queenside castling. To have opposite side castles. But at the same time, like, it also looks like he might be adding another defender there, and if he's doing that, I really hope he sees that that's not a good idea to start the trade, because if knight takes, pawn takes, and then if bishop takes, pawn takes, and then even though you capture it back, you got 2 pawns, your opponent got a piece, and Hutch would be up. Hutch would be down material. Yeah. You start here, takes, yeah, Yasuo would be up material, so Hutch would be down material in that case. So he does castle. I think he's just waiting for Yasuo to play something dangerous, not dangerous, but what's the word? Ambitious. But really, all you should be doing is just developing, maybe even just playing knight d7. Maybe just play knight d7 and then play b6. If pawn takes, and then you open up your rook this way. Either way, if you play b6, if pawn doesn't take, like let's say you defend the pawn, even stuff like a5 and then b6, and then if then knight takes, and then you can play bishop a5 and it's defended by the rook, and maybe trade off, and then the rook is having some activity along the a file. So ideas there. You just get developed with knight d7, and then try to activate this bishop. The most promising plan. Okay, so you could play there, but then you just castle. Then you just capture en passant. In that case, you can capture with the pawn, and then you can still develop the bishop to h6. So definitely, if you keep that closed, if you don't capture en passant, then you could play a5, and then you can play bishop a6, and then your bishop is primed to make some attacks. You could attack the bishop and the knight at the same time, and maybe even scare Hutch into playing knight takes e4. But if knight takes e4, you're definitely losing material. So I hope he's not thinking that. I hope he's not thinking he can do that. So yeah, you could still play a5. You really do need to get this knight developed somehow, but at this point maybe you can come over to the king side and then push this pawn, and then you'd be attacking this bishop, and also hopefully even have if you could somehow get your queen over to g6, then you'd be able to put pressure on g2. Definitely lots of ideas here. Okay, so he's bringing his rook over to g6. That's definitely a good plan, especially if you plan on bringing your knight over here after pushing f4. So if you push f4, and then if you take, then knight takes, and then you have the rook and knight lined up perfectly. Yeah, lots of chances here for either side, as long as both sides keep their cool. Yeah, we're seeing lots of very careful. This is a very closed position. So in closed positions, you really get like kind of a slow grind down into the end game. So we might be in for a very very long game here. I wouldn't say very long, because there still only is 10 minutes on the clock to start. So even with 5-second increment, game shouldn't go longer than 20 or 25 minutes. But I mean, we're in for a game that should, barring any mistakes, any drop pieces, the game should go on into an end game. We might actually see the first real end game today. Hopefully, as the tournament goes on, people are going to be learning from their games. People are going to be learning from their mistakes, and see that you really need to protect your pieces. Can't just give a piece away for free. Hopefully, we start seeing less of that as the tournament goes on, and we might actually start seeing more games play out all the way to the end game, which is definitely exciting. It's how chess should be going. We usually don't want to see people winning just because of a blunder. Like, we want to see somebody actually calculate things out into a grind. That's what we're here for. That's what we want to see, because that means that the entire game, we don't know who's going to take advantage at some point, and then usually there is a slight advantage, and we can see that but as long as there's chances for either side, chess remains exciting to watch. As soon as a piece gets dropped, though, it's pretty much over. The only thing that matters at that point is the technique, just to get down to a one endgame. So maybe Black, Yasuo, thinking of playing Queen H4, and then playing Queen H2 mate. So that's definitely an idea. You should take the knight first, though, because if you play the threat first, you can deal with that threat. Play either H3 or G3. Oh no, not g3. Yeah, with h3. So now if you play queen h4, h3, and your attack's over. So I'm actually kind of at this point it's such a closed position. I am rooting for Yasuo to win in this one because it looks like he has a lot more activity for against the king. Whereas Hutch kind of has a passive position. The queen is kind of stuck over on the queen side in her little castle, not really doing much because these pawns are preventing like everything from happening. You'd have to play over here, and then at that point there's still so many pieces guarding everything that how are you even going to bring your queen into your opponent's side of the board is the big question. You have to bring this bishop over here and then bring the queen over here, and now where is that bishop going to go? You can't go anywhere really. You'd have to bring your bishop back, queen over here, and then bring your queen over here, bring your bishop back, and then bring your bishop back over to g4. It's extremely complex. I don't know if he's going to see that. And that you can tuck your bishop back to d1, and then play queen e2, and then if the knight weren't here, you'd be able to play queen g4. Obviously, Yasuo could prevent that as long as you defend g4 somehow. Like maybe you can play knight f6. This isn't a huge threat because the bishop would just take and you would lose the exchange. However, I mean, you could have just played knight f6, and then after knight takes f6, rook takes f6. Yeah, so this is sadly not really doing much. Maybe he's thinking of playing h5 to just kind of push the bishop away. You probably don't want to start trades here because you would open up this rook. And the last thing you want to do, if you have this advantage where you control the king side with rooks and possibly a queen soon, especially the queen could come over straight up to g3. This is definitely Pogu. but yeah, queen g3 can definitely happen, bringing the queen into that side of the board, and now it can't. So you got to give Hutch some credit, really giving some counterplay here. But the only thing that I would say is a huge imbalance is that Yasuo has multiple pieces that can get into as soon as you get rid of that knight, you could or you could do this and bring the queen in this way. You could bring the queen into the game. The bishop is not easily brought into the game, but you could technically bring the bishop into the game with 1, 2, 3 moves. So definitely more options for black. In a closed positions, you have that kind of tempo. You have that kind of tempo to do moves like bringing the bishop 1, 2, 3 moves over to get over to the king side. And Yasuo is going to be able to bring every single piece into the game, whereas Hutch can basically only has this knight in the game. And this rook, how are you going to get this rook in the game? Maybe you're going to push this pawn, get the rook behind. There are chances to bring the bishop in the game. I really do think Hutch should start trades here. The other way around, Yasuo should not start trades that way, but Hutch should start trades here because as soon as you get rid of that knight, he should have just traded off that knight. Oh, now he's doubling up rook, so there are chances for Hutch. Yasuo wasn't really taking advantage of the fact that there are some chances here, and as long as he allows some kind of trades happening on the F file with getting rid of the F pawn, this rook battery is getting pretty dangerous. So I mean, I had more chances for Yasuo is playing knight h5 and then knight g3. So earlier in the position, I thought Yasuo was much better, but now it's not so clear. Now it's actually looking pretty even, and maybe Hutch. I mean, he does have a higher rating. At the same time, though, rating isn't everything, especially with these players who just started playing recently. And especially since considering that, looked like for the opening for the most part, Yasuo was doing much better. But now it's actually looking like Hutch is doing better. So I feel like Yasuo didn't take advantage of that advantage that he had. He had a lot of stuff going on for him in the king side, and now there's just this giant F file, like just plowing through Yasuo's position. And how is he going to deal with this? I mean, there's really not much I can see now. Like, it looked like there was a lot of ideas earlier on in the position for Yasuo, but now looks like Hutch is gonna, clutch. Hutch is gonna clutch, and he's gonna take this F-file. So, not sure what Black can even do here. Like, maybe you can play knight d7, attacking the knight. Okay, so bringing the bishop into the game. So now you're threatening to attack the queen, and also preventing any more pawn movements. But at this point, at this point you even could, I don't know if there's a tactic here. Maybe you can do rook takes knight, g takes f6. So rook takes f6, g takes f6. But then, this bishop is stuck here, so maybe you do knight takes f6. And then if pawn takes, it's pinned. But I don't know. That's losing material. I don't know if you'd want to do that. Definitely would not want to do that. Okay, so start off with taking away that bishop. Rook can just take. And of course now, you can't discount the fact that Yasuo can still bring queen g3. And queen g3 can do some damage, like taking away pawns, etc. And that, okay, so now, there's no longer a bishop here, so you can just take these pieces. I would say e takes d5, probably the best chance, and then bring your rook over to e8, attacking this pawn. Obviously, you could still also bring queen g3 after that, before you play rook e8. Okay, you can play knight takes e8. So it looks like he wants to play on the f-file, which is a little bit dangerous. Maybe he's thinking of playing maybe he's thinking of playing rook f6, actually, because there's a knight and a pawn guarding it. So you can play rook f6, and then you can play rook a f8, and then you have doubled up rooks. And then maybe you can start. Okay, so now the queen's guarding that pawn. So if I were playing black here to play rook f6, this just seems like there's decent chances playing that way. Okay, so if you wanted to go for that file, you should have taken with the pawn instead of the knight, because then he'd be attacking things. But now he has to start making. I would recommend playing queen g3. Okay, now you can't do that. Now you have to play rook g3 or even rook f6 still. Oh no, rook f6 does not work now. Okay, so now I would say Hutch is definitely winning, because he's going to win a rook for a bishop, winning the exchange. And if he moves the rook, then he takes this rook. And not only that, you can't move the rook, because then it's like you don't even get the bishop back. So I guess if you play rook f6, you're just losing you're just straight up losing a rook. So that's sad, but that's how it goes sometimes. The best thing I could recommend, maybe playing queen g3, because then after bishop takes rook, after bishop takes g6, then queen takes g6, and at least you still have some kind of control over the g file, and also this diagonal as well, since it's a queen. That seems to be, that's the best opportunity, is just take bishop takes rook and queen takes rook, bishop. Does not seem to be any chance for Yasuo now at this point. But these players have surprised us. Hutch up an entire piece, he might not know how to handle that. So there's always the case that you could be up a piece, but if you let your opponent get some material back, or get some attacking chances back, then that material really doesn't do much for your position. So I'm thinking the only chances that Yasuo has, not many. Not many. Because you have to be defending this f8. Okay, so you have to bring your queen over to e6 and then queen e7 to defend this f8 square enough, because eventually you play rook f3, and then you play queen f2, and then you have a giant battery. And that's just going to prove fatal against Yasuo. Really sad when you see this happen, when you see a giant imbalance happen in chess, and a lot of these players are learning that as soon as a huge imbalance happens, it's just like, just take that to the bank, just take it straight to the bank. So yeah, it looks like he's trying to clear the file now, but there's not really much you can do. Maybe you can attack the queen, but the queen could just move and continue to attack the knight, and the knight's completely undefended. Maybe you come over to a4, but at that point your knight's completely out of the game and not doing anything at all. These rooks are just going to be coming in. I mean, rook f3 just alone right there. Oh, now at this point, now you have a mate. So rook f8 check, and he goes for it. Rook takes f8, and then rook takes f8 mate. So good game from both players. It looks like Hutch really pulled in for the clutch. And so looks like both players were actually playing very strongly for the very beginning, and it does look like Hutch. It does have a better pawn chain, but at the same time, Yasuo has a lot of control over e4, which is a center square, and so I think bringing in this knight definitely a mistake. And let's go into a live analysis here. Definitely a mistake bringing that knight twice. I would say that's the first step. That was the first step for Yasuo losing the game. With a slight inaccuracy here is moving the. Usually you don't want to move a piece twice in the opening, so you could just castle here, and you're fine, and you get your king protected, or you could even just play knight bd7. But moving the knight twice, definitely not good. So maybe he was hoping that Hutch would just take here. But like I said earlier, you lose a piece if you start that. And the best bet against that, like maybe he was thinking that if you started here now, you get the pawns back, but you're still down a pawn. And your queen's in the center, which becomes a target. So there are some issues with that. So that's why you do not want to start that trade. But he didn't. He didn't actually start that trade. Hutch played very strongly here, and he knew to trade off because he moved the bishop, or he moved the knight first, and so now there's no longer a double attack. Not only that, he gives Yasuo a stronger pawn center, but he doesn't lose any material. And now he's gaining influence over the king side. And so you notice that just gets his pieces into play. And Yasuo was actually having some good chances here. Like I said, let's look at the evaluation bar. Let's see at this point. After all these trades, at this point, White is overwhelmingly winning here according to the engine. But we do have to take into account that the engine sees things we don't. And also, we have to take into account that they're judging the position, like from a human perspective. This queen is completely out of the game, and yeah, we saw that Hutch really came through with the plan. He developed a plan of getting the rooks onto the F file, and then you see the rook come. And then, of course, playing King H just allows a mate in two. So we really want to be careful when we play games not to allow your opponent to get too much influence over any file or anything like that. Rooks love open files. So I would say the biggest turning point would have to be this move. So let's look at the evaluation. So it is saying that it's better for White, but yeah, now it's more closer to both sides. So I would say this is even. As soon as you move this piece, now it's a lot, but now it's at least a pawn better for White. Almost a pawn better for White, according to the evaluation. But I would say moving that piece twice is definitely unnecessary. And at this point, let's see, where does it go completely south? Just looking at the evaluation. Okay, so this move, it allows en passant, first of all. So and I remember this move because if you take en passant, you just capture. But this was kind of an unnecessary move. You need to play knight bd7 first, and then you play b6. And looking at the evaluation, it's still pretty even here. And so you need to play knight bd7. You're planning to play b6, and then if pawn takes, and you open up your rook. And then you can play bishop a6. So there were some chances here if bishop takes bishop. rook takes bishop, and so let me just show that. Let's make a few moves here. So maybe you move the knight here to attack, trying to trade. Maybe you're trying to trade off. You play b6. If pawn takes, knight takes, or I mean, if pawn takes. Obviously, if you just take this, then queen takes. But if you do something like this, maybe you play bishop here, and then if bishop, maybe you could do here. But then you would just get a weird doubled up pawn position. Well, not really, because that would be an interesting position. But if you do something else, like take the bishop, then you get the rook here, and maybe the queen comes over, but then you just push this pawn. And it's fine. Let's look at the evaluation in that situation. This is a theoretical line, completely even. This is completely even. Although this is a theoretical line that didn't happen in the game, but we do that a lot in chess. We look at theoretical lines and we see like, okay, how could this have happened? But I definitely think this was a huge inaccuracy here. Let's just see what the opening explorer says. This is already out of book. Let's look at some lines. So just castle here, or playing. Knight e4 is actually recommended, but it's number 3. So knight bd7 is actually the number 1 line here. But castling is the most logical because it just protects your king. It gets your rook into the game, and you have pieces that need to be developed. You can't. One of the things that we say in opening principles for chess is we do not want to move a piece too many times in the opening when we still have other pieces that are just waiting in the sidelines. We want to get these pieces into the game somehow. Like I said, if you want to get this bishop and the knight in the game, you play knight bd7, then you play b6, and if pawn takes, you take with the pawn, and then you can play bishop a6, or you could take with the knight and then play a5 and then play bishop a6. Anyway, I think that was the critical moment really in the opening where things started to gradually just get worse and worse and worse, and the tipping point was playing this pawn. So I would say that this is the position where black really needed to be careful and not make hasty moves. Like, this is where you needed to think about how to get your other pieces into the game, and how to come up with a plan as soon as it presents itself to you. Maybe you're going to do something along this f file because of this pawn that's really thrust up there into your opponent's camp. And so this is the critical moment in my opinion. Anyway, I will be back in a little bit to stream my own games. I am going to be taking a break, maybe be back in about 20 to 30 minutes. But I will be streaming my own games and just relaxing for the day, because those are all 3 games for round 2, day 1 of Pogchamps. See you next time. Bye!